What is up, guys? Today I am going to be reviewing every single episode of Rewind Rumble Season 1. This is part 1, and in this part I will be talking about every single episode from Goku Black vs Dark Sonic to Super Saiyan 4 Goku vs Dark Spine Sonic. Also, I would like to point out that I hold Cartoon Fight Club and Rewind Rumble to the same standard in terms of number ratings, but not in terms of overall episode quality. For example, I gave both Sims vs Shovel Knight and Batman vs Tuxedo Mask a 6 out of 10. But by Rewind Rumble standards, Batman vs Tuxedo Mask is bad, and by Cartoon Fight Club standards, Sims vs Shovel Knight is pretty good. In this video I will rate them by Cartoon Fight Club standards, which are just normal YouTube standards. Anyway, let's jump right into it. The first episode of Rewind Rumble was Goku Black vs Dark Sonic, and this episode is the best premiere to any YouTube channel ever. But the best thing about it is also the worst thing about it. This episode was so good that it set an unrealistic standard to the show that was clearly impossible to meet. To me, this intro right here set the standard for Rewind Rumble. If you went back in time and told me that this scene would be in an episode of Rewind Rumble, then I would think you're lying, and I would assume that it is from Cartoon Fight Night. To me, the fact that there are mediocre episodes of Rewind Rumble is kind of false advertising, since they are promised that every episode would be great. Anyway, Goku Black vs Dark Sonic is easily in my top 10 best Rewind Rumble episodes. The animation was death battle tier, the action was super fast paced and slick, the cinematography was great, and I liked how the music was in sync with the fight. Overall, this episode is an absolute masterpiece and I have nothing bad to say about it. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 2, Shadow vs Sasuke. This episode is also incredible. The fight was amazingly animated and really fast paced. Overall, it is easily in my top 10 best episodes. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 3, The Swordsman Free for All. This has always been one of my favorite videos from Animation Rewind, and it is easily my favorite Total War. Sure, this episode felt like a random fight compilation instead of an actual story like the other wars. Sure, this episode was anticlimactic, and the ending wasn't nearly as epic as the one above all versus everyone. But this episode has one thing that the other wars lack, and that's consistency. The Mario vs Sonic Total War had some scenes that were great like Bowser Jr. vs Tails, it had some scenes that were good like Yoshi vs Knuckles, and it had some scenes that kind of sucked like Bowser vs Eggman. Same goes for the other large-scale Total War episodes, except for this one and Justice League vs Avengers. The animation quality ranges from a 10 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10. Sure, that's not perfect, but it's way more consistent than any of the other wars. My favorite scenes were the first 4 scenes, they had death battle levels of quality. Also, even though the ending was a bit anticlimactic, it was still a great animation on its own. My only complaint is that I found it weird that Deadpool and Trunks got voice actors, but everybody else got text. Overall, this is easily one of my favorite episodes of Rewind Rumble, and it was my favorite episode for a while. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 4. Dio vs Alucard. This episode is a huge step down from the first 3 episodes. The animation was still great and there were parts of the fight that I liked, but the fight was incredibly slow. It was very stop-start and it went from cool action to bland dialogue. The main problem with this episode is that it focused way too much on the story and not nearly enough on the actual fighting. Also, the fight itself, even without the dialogue, is still very slow. I appreciate it when Rewind Rumble episodes have a mix of both story and action, like Red Hood vs. The Punisher and Sonic vs. The Flash. This episode is an extreme in the story direction. This episode really felt like wasted potential. The animator of this episode has animated tons of great fights for Death Battle and even other episodes of Cartoon Fight Club and Rewind Rumble. But this episode felt kind of rushed, and I think it could have been great if AR gave the animator more time to work on it. Overall, the animation quality was excellent and there were some cool parts in the fight, but it was pretty slow for the most part and it was kind of a disappointment. 6 out of 10, it's closer to a 7 than it is to a 5. Next is episode 5. Pokemon vs. Digimon. This episode is much better than Dio vs. Alucard, but still does not hold a candle to the first 3 episodes. I really enjoyed the fight, but I felt like it was a little on the slow side. It wasn't super slow like Dio vs. Alucard, but it wasn't as fast-paced and slick as the first 3 episodes. Even though the first 4 scenes were great, the ending was pretty weak. It was really anticlimactic and a very forced ending. Overall, this episode was really great despite its problems. 8 out of 10, it's closer to a 9 than it is to a 7. Next is episode 6. Spider-Man vs. Bumblebee. This episode was great. The fight was really cool, and overall I really enjoyed it. My only complaint is that I wish the episode had a bit more story. Obviously not as much story as Dio vs. Alucard, but Bumblebee literally murders Spider-Man for no reason, but that is just a nitpick. 8 out of 10, it's closer to a 9 than it is to a 7. Next is episode 7. Sasuke vs. Strider. This episode is on par with the first 3 in my opinion. The animation was terrific and the fight was very fast and slick. Overall it was really amazing. 10 out of 10. Next is the first bonus episode of Rewind Rumble. W.D. Gaster vs. The Puppet. This episode was pretty good, it was better than I remembered it being and I really enjoyed it. 7 out of 10. Next is episode 8. Goku vs. Saitama. This is one of my favorite episodes of Rewind Rumble. The fight is exhilarating, well animated, and fast paced. It was totally worth the wait and you can tell that a lot of effort was put into it. Overall I really loved it. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 9. Freddy Krueger vs. Wolverine. This is another one of my favorite 3D episodes. The fight is well choreographed, fast paced, and violent. Overall it is one of the best episodes of season 1. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 10. Archie Sonic vs. Paper Mario. I really loved this episode. The fight is fast paced and very entertaining. Overall it was awesome. 9 out of 10. Next is bonus episode 2. Danny Phantom vs. Jake Long. This episode is a lot worse than I remembered it being. The animation was very good, but the fight was slow and not very exciting. It was also pretty repetitive. Danny just fired lasers in the same position and Jake charged at Danny the whole time. Overall it is one of my least favorite episodes, but it is still decent overall. The animation was great and there were some parts of the fight that I thought were cool. 6 out of 10. This episode really sticks out like a sore thumb compared to episode 11. Superman vs. Jiren. This is easily in my top 10 favorite episodes. The fight is amazingly animated and really fast paced. Overall this episode was awesome and it is definitely one of my favorites. 10 out of 10. Also, I have a really funny story about this episode. Before it came out, I was so hyped that I had a dream, where I saw it in a movie theater at Showbiz Pizza Place. Billy Bob Bear was there, and there was also an animatronic cheesecake with a face. There was also a boy in the theater who looked like a kid in my 4th grade class, except he wore a red leotard, and if you touch him, it takes you to a pocket dimension with Nightwing vs. Daredevil from Cartoon Fight Club. Next is episode 12. Spyro vs. Crash. This episode was amazing. The fight was over 5 minutes long, the animation was great, and it was a super entertaining episode. Although the death battle had better animation, this episode had much more exciting and fast-paced action. Overall I really loved it and I cannot wait for Spiro vs Tiflis. Hopefully it comes out soon, because it has been delayed for forever. 9 out of 10. Next is episode 13. Classic Sonic vs Pikachu. I really enjoyed this episode. The animation was great and the fight was fun. Overall it was really good, and I do not have much to say about it. 8 out of 10. Next is episode 14. Miles Morales vs Deku. This episode was very enjoyable. The animation was great and I really enjoyed the fight. Also I am psyched for Spider-Man and Miles Morales vs Deku and All Might. That episode is gonna be an absolute masterpiece. My only complaint is that Josh's bonus scene lacks sound effects. 8 out of 10. Next is bonus episode 3. Thanos vs Dragon Ball. This episode is a significant improvement from the first two bonus episodes. The first scene by AR was really good, but the Thanos vs Beerus scene was really the highlight of the video. That scene had really great animation and really cool action. Overall it was a really neat companion to Infinity War. 8 out of 10. Next is episode 15. One Punch Man vs My Hero Academia. This episode is so much better than I could have ever imagined it to be. The trailer for this episode made it look like nothing special, but the episode itself is amazing. The animation is great and the fight is really fast-paced and cool. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 16. Goku Black vs Reverse Flash. This was even better than the last episode. The animation was awesome and the fight was even faster paced. Overall it is definitely in my top 10 of the season. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 17. Hulk vs Godzilla. This episode had amazing animation, but I felt like the fight was too short. Overall I thought the fight was really cool, but I think, if it was longer, then it would have been much better. 8 out of 10. Next is episode 18. Naruto vs Avatar. This episode was great. The animation, for both scenes was amazing and the action was very fast-paced. Also I am sorry, if it seems like I am saying the same thing over and over again, but a lot of these early Rewind Rumble episodes are almost identical in quality. Overall it was really great. 8 out of 10, it's closer to a 9 than it is to a 7. Next is episode 19. The Incredibles vs the Fantastic Four. This episode was absolutely fantastic, no pun intended. The animation was really great, and overall I don't really have much to say about it. 9 out of 10. Next is episode 20. Broly vs Ashura. This episode was really good, but I felt like it was overhyped. This episode was hyped up, as being one of the best Rewind Rumble episodes, but I think that AR should have just treated it like any other episode. The animation was really great, but I thought the fight was a little on the slow side. Overall it was amazing in many ways, but it had some problems and it was really overhyped. 8 out of 10. Next is episode 21. Superboy vs Gohan. This episode was really great. The fight was fast, well animated, and very entertaining. 9 out of 10. My only problem with the episode is this.
The son of Piccolo, Gohan.
Next is episode 22. Sonic vs the Flash. This is the greatest video ever uploaded to YouTube. This is one of the only episodes of Rewind Rumble that did the story exceptionally well. Like I said before, episodes like Dio vs Alucard focused way too much on the story and barely had any action, and episodes like Spider-Man vs Bumblebee were completely devoid of story. But this episode flawlessly balances the plot and dialogue with the fast-paced action. I loved every second of this episode. The animation is amazing, the action is super fast-paced, and the Sonic vs Shadow fight was also really great. Overall, this is the most exhilarating fight in animation Rewind history, and I would love to see more episodes like this. My only complaint is that the ad for Boruto vs Gohan in the middle of the fight was really obnoxious and unnecessary. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 23. The Mario vs Sonic Total War. This episode is kind of a masterpiece, but it has a few issues. The story made no sense and there were a lot of scenes that didn't connect to the story that was set up in the first scenes. There were a couple of scenes that did not really hold up to the standard of Rewind Rumble. But I still liked a lot of those scenes and the only scene that I disliked was Bowser vs Eggman, but the animation quality was still way more consistent than a lot of the Total Wars on Cartoon Fight Club. I thought the ending was anticlimactic, but still very enjoyable on its own. Also, I felt like it wasn't necessary to separate the video into two parts. It could have easily just been one part like the Reality Warper free-for-all. My only other complaints are just nitpicks like audio mixing issues and weird sound effects. Other than that, this episode was amazing. The animation was fantastic and my favorite scene was Mecha Sonic vs Metal Mario. Overall, despite its flaws, it is still amazing. 10 out of 10. Next is episode 24. Slenderman vs Herobrine. Although this episode was overshadowed by the two episodes that came before it, I still really liked it. The fight was great and overall I really enjoyed it. 8 out of 10. Next is episode 25. Android 18 vs Starfire. This episode was really great. The fight was fast and very entertaining. Overall I do not have much to say about it. 8 out of 10, it's closer to a 9 than it is to a 7. Next is episode 26. Sasuke vs Noctis. This episode is fantastic. The animation is really great and the fight was really cool. 9 out of 10. And finally, bonus episode 4. Super Saiyan 4 Goku vs Darkspeed Sonic. This episode is good, but weaker than most episodes in the first half of season 1. The fight was well animated and very fast paced, but the sound quality was awful. Also I did not agree with the outcome, but overall I enjoyed it. 7 out of 10. And that concludes this video. Overall this was when Rewind Rumble was at its best. Even though some episodes were weaker than others, I liked every single episode. Also my favorite episode of Rewind Rumble came out during this time. The upload schedule was pretty consistent, but towards the end it started becoming a bit more random. It wasn't as chaotic as it is now. Usually episodes were uploaded between once a week and once every 2 weeks. In part 2 I will be talking about the rest of season 1. From Paper Mario vs. 2 Link, all the way to the Reality Warper free-for-all. Goodbye.
I just noticed that I forgot to talk about Cloud vs. Chrono. I forgot it existed while writing the script and editing the video. But that isn't the episode's fault because the episode itself was really good. The animation was great, but the fight was really short. Overall, I really liked it despite the fact that I forgot it existed. 8 out of 10. It's closer to a 9 than it is to a 7. Also, the reason why I am using a different text-to-speech voice is because the original site that I was using shut down while I was editing the video.